Feeling stuck or unfulfilled? Searching for more meaning in your work and life? Wondering what's next? You're not alone, and you're in the right place. This is Focus on Why, the podcast that turns reflection into action. I'm Amy Rowlandson, and each week I dive deep with guests who've chosen to live and work with purpose. Together we explore what drives them, shapes their decisions, and gives their life meaning. Through real stories and honest conversations, you'll discover how to gain clarity, make confident choices, and create a life that truly matters. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Before we get started, have you signed up for my weekly newsletter, Friday Focus? Each Friday, I explore one powerful topic and share a single actionable takeaway to enhance your week. Sign up via the link in the show notes and start every Friday with Focus. Today on Focus on Why, I am joined by Carolyn Hobdey. Hello and welcome.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Well, I'm very excited to ask you, what is it you're focusing on right now?
I'm focusing on men. They are my focus. I'm passionate about men and I'm passionate about men in the workplace.
Tell me more.
I think it's never been tougher than it is today to be a man in our society. I've worked in a lot of male intensive environments and I think that it's really challenging. The majority of leaders and owners of businesses, I think, are still male. So there is a predominance of them I know out there, and it's really easy for us to go, oh, they've got it really good. But I think at the moment in society, there's a lot of negativity about men, and I think that vibe is coming through loud and clear. And I feel for them because I think that a lot of men don't really know what to do with that and how to respond to it. So I'm focusing in on how can we improve that dialogue? How can we work with men rather than against them and stop putting them in a place of defensiveness?
And how long has this been your focus?
I think in terms of men, I'd probably say most of my adult life in different ways. But I think that a lot of things went on for me sort of kind of 2018 onwards. And I'll be honest, I think in the first instance, I thought that therefore that made my focus women. I thought maybe women would relate to my personal story, my professional story. I thought that perhaps, that was where it was going. And then as it started to unfold, I think what I really realized is that, yes, I wanted to make work and the workplace better for women, better for women like me that had, had some pretty tough and challenging times. And actually, what I then began to realize is that it was the men that I wanted to talk to. It was the men that I wanted to take with us, and the men that I wanted to communicate with in terms of if we're going to make the workplace better for women, the reality is men do still hold quite a lot of that control and that power and the decision making authority. And if we didn't work with them and in collaboration with them, then things actually weren't going to go better for women. So it's probably really been in the last couple of years that I've just realized that, yeah, talking to men, working with men, and helping them to have a different way than the patriarchy, or certainly what we understand as the patriarchy, was probably the place to focus.
And when did you start to really understand what was needed and what you could do about it?
I think I'm still on a voyage of discovery. I think that's the honest truth because for the avoidance of doubt for anybody tuning into this, I'm not a man. So I think that's probably the first place to start. So I am on a voyage of discovery of understanding what it is like for men, and I'm doing more and more of that and understanding how they feel, a bit about how they think, how they respond to some of what's going on. So for me, it's not a done deal in terms of saying, right, I now understand, and away we go. So at the moment, I'm peeling back the layers of the onion. I'm getting into some amazing conversations with men and with women as well, to be fair, about what it's like for guys out there, and yeah, just learning all of the time in terms of, yeah, how they're experiencing the world, and particularly the world of work.
And are you finding any challenges, Carolyn, around being a woman helping men to become more, or what's the word? Just improving the dialogue, I guess. What is it that you want to happen?
Definitely to improve the dialogue. Absolutely for me to get into organizations with men and women, but leadership teams, particularly where it's male intensive, but we've got obviously other genders, other groups, other minorities involved. So talking to them in situ is what I want to try and improve everybody's understanding of everybody else. I talk in my work about that bridging the divide between the patriarchy and the wokerati, because I think probably both of those are getting a bit of a bad press. But in terms of challenges, I think that I get a lot of feedback from, for example, posts on LinkedIn and other platforms that I speak on, from men going, thank you. Thank you very much for saying this, because actually you can say what we can't because you're a woman. If we started speaking about this, or dare I say, complaining about this or raising it as an issue, we would be shut down and silenced and told we'd had it way too good for way too long. So we can't say it. So thank you for that. What I find is the challenge is that men can't say that publicly for the most part. I get lots of DMs as opposed to public comments. I do get some, but more DMs supporting me because men don't feel they can publicly share how they feel or say how it's impacting them or say that they're having a bit of a tough time. So I think being a woman has a benefit from that point of view, because I can say it, not least because the traditional paradigm has been that it's men versus women. I know it's a little bit more nuanced and complicated than that these days, but from a man versus woman type thing, I can say it, like I said, in a way that they can't. What gets reported back to me by some others who also talk a little bit in this space is that they get a little bit of the, oh, you're claiming our space type stuff. I've not personally experienced that, so I'm interested to see if that comes in my direction at any stage. But the biggest challenge there is having these dialogues out loud with men, because they don't feel they can necessarily talk about it.
And you also mentioned that you want to help women and that they would relate to your personal and professional story.
Mm.
What is it that you feel they would relate with or to?
Well, I have a lot of story in the first instance. So I think my life has been, I always describe it as, it's messy adulting, which I actually think is not massively unusual, but maybe some of the content of it is a little bit more unusual and out there at times. But I think from a professional point of view, I have been a woman very much in a man's world. I would describe myself in a lot of my corporate settings as frequently finding myself as the only bird on the board. And I think that, women who are either in that situation or aspiring to that, or are in just maybe not on the board, but are in teams where, they are in a minority and maybe the only woman, would relate to that. I think I've experienced a lot of sort of toxic behavior from a leadership point of view. And don't get me wrong, some of that toxic behavior has absolutely been from other women, other senior women in various settings. I think women experience that a lot. I refer to them as kind of pseudo men, those women that think they have to sort of give masculine traits in order to sort of get on, and I find them way, way worse. But so I think there's that side. I think from a personal point of view, I've experienced a lot of toxic relationships in my personal life. I've gone through several abusive relationships, and a lot of those patterns that relate to my self-worth and my self-belief from early on in my life. And again, I encounter an awful lot of women that relate to that and those sort of negative self-worth built-in attitudes and behaviors.
And you mentioned there that you often found yourself being the only bird on the board, and using even the phraseology there is interesting, just in how you describe it, because you're stepping into a space where that is what's being said. The language is one thing. What else is happening?
I think there'll be things that there'd be the overt things that people would recognize, but I think for me it was a double-edged sword as well, because not only was I the only female, but I was also the HR person. So instantly people have this idea that means it's all soft and fluffy. That's the sort of terminology that gets used. So it's like, oh, well, you're in favor of the people and you're in favor of feelings. And so you instantly get sort of minimized. And so you're not only a woman and therefore it's about feelings and people, but you're also the HR person, which means it must be about feelings and people. And what I discovered a lot in my career is I used to say I had more balls than anybody else around the table, because when you actually do work in HR, you realize that you have more tough conversations than anyone else in the organization ever has. You're having to be the referee, you're often the punch bag. I would describe HR people a little bit as the Swiss Army knife of the organization. You have to be all things to all people and able to just switch that on at any point and sort of become the new thing that this situation needs you to be, and sometimes even within a situation. And that in itself is sort of being diminished for being a woman, being diminished for them being an HR person, because it's taken a long time for HR people to have a seat around the table anyway, to not just be seen as, well, you're always just championing the people and that cause, I think is quite hard to. Not all HR people have a lot of emotional intelligence. I don't want to make that as a sweeping statement, but in general, they tend to. Obviously, they do tend to be more people oriented. And often I was sitting around a table with people who can't articulate their emotions, they don't know what they are. And again, I think that's a society problem that we have with men in particular. And that isn't a problem that I lay at their door in particular. It's how society treats men and raises men, that their emotions can quite often be much more rudimentary. It's that mad, sad, and glad thing, that those are sort of almost the emotions that they recognize and they tune into. Whereas the reality is they're experiencing and feeling a much more nuanced set of emotions, but we don't encourage them to have the language to communicate those emotions. So you're dealing with something at a much more rudimentary level. And I think I'm an empath, so I feel deeply, I feel the emotions of others deeply. I can see it, and I'm actually very good at articulating it. I would describe myself as having an emotional keyboard. For me, it's like a piano keyboard, and I can play up and down those emotions because I sort of recognize like every note. And so mine, I can understand the nuances, I can process what they are quite quickly, and put a name to them, and therefore sort of, deal with that. And what I've found myself quite often is dealing with people that just either yelled and banged the table, laughed. Yeah, that it was much more rudimentary. So yeah, it was, and it's inevitably is the, the other things that we talk about, like, being asked to be the note taker, or, the one that writes stuff down, or, takes the tea order and whatever. And I actively pushed back against those kind of things, but had to build the courage to do that over time.
And saying that you're a natural empath, feeling deeply and really tapping into the emotions of those around you, you could have chosen anybody to champion, but you haven't.
Mm.
So why this and why now?
I think for me is that thing of I want the workplace to be better for everyone, is the reality. I think that's why I was in HR, what I wanted to do when I was there, and still what drives me. Because I mean, I know we can all sit there and go, well, it's a bit of a national pastime to moan about our boss or moan about our workplace and do that stuff. But I do think more and more people are really unhappy at work, and I really don't believe it needs to be like that. I really believe it doesn't have to be like that, that actually workplaces can be really positive and a really positive contributor to people's lives. And I think now more than ever, our work lives and our home lives blend together, and it's a fundamental part of who we are. And for way more people, because of the nature of their work and what workplaces want, they're taking that work home with them in some capacity, whether literally or, in their heads, or and their feelings, or however. So I think that it can be much better. And I see so many people that are still really unhappy in the work that they do. And I do genuinely believe it doesn't have to be that way. So I've always believed in that. And I do think that, why this? I do think that so much so still men are the key to a lot of that, because they are still the majority of leaders. They are still heading up a lot of our organizations. They are still the power holders, the decision makers. And I think they are part of the key. And I firmly, firmly believe that attacking them for that, because these are structures and institutions and ways of thinking that yes, these men potentially are contributing to, but they don't even know that most of the time because it's been there for so long, centuries long. And so you're asking them to sort of do something differently that they've just grown up with and seen that through the generations. So I don't think attacking them is the answer because they're sort of going like, well, what? I don't even sort of see it and I don't recognize it. So I think working with them is what is really important. I think why now? I think it's a mixture of things, really. I think that some of it's about age. I've lived through a lot of it, and I think now I've got enough evidence, enough confidence, enough experience to speak up about these things. And I think I've probably been talking about them and feeling them for a long time, but now I'm sort of in that place is like, well, okay, let's say it out loud. And also it's a blend of the personal and the professional. I've been through a lot personally, and I firmly believe that not by a long, long, long way are all guys bad. But I think we have this narrative of they are. And I think there's a bit of championing of the good ones. And I think some of that is driven by I've met quite a lot of bad ones.
You mentioned that a lot of people are genuinely unhappy, and the statistics from Gallup State of the Workplace report 2025 and many years preceding will back that up for sure, because the last time that I checked, it was the 2025 report, and combining those who are not engaged with those who are actively disengaged, you got to 79%. So you've got almost 8 out of 10 who are not happy and not engaged and not productive in their work. What is your secret for being happy in your work?
I think a sense of purpose is important, and I think we can find purpose in I'm not saying going to say every job because that would be arrogant, I think, to say that, but I think that in a lot of roles you can find some sort of sense of purpose. I think connection with the people, connection with the work that you do and why you're doing it and what you're contributing to, I think is really important. It always feels a little bit kind of, I was born in the 70s, so it feels a little bit Miss World to go, wanting to make a difference. That was always the answer, wasn't it? What do you want to do? I want to make a difference. But I think, feeling like you can have some kind of impact. I talk an awful lot with leaders about legacy. I talk with most people that I meet about legacy. What is the legacy that you want to leave? And that legacy might be, you leave it when you leave a room. That might be that you're leading this group of people and you get promoted or whatever. And what's the legacy you want to have left behind? You might leave an organization. What's the legacy you want to leave behind? But in life in general, how do you want people to be left feeling when they've interacted with you? And for me, I want to leave a legacy. I want to leave a legacy where if like one person goes, I interacted with Carolyn and she did this for me and my life was better as a result of it, or I was better as a person as a result of it. So that legacy for me is really important because none of us wants to think that we were meaningless, that we had no value.
And how are you measuring your impact?
I think at the moment, like I said, I'm on this voyage of discovery of like posting and talking about this topic. And so at the moment, the measurement is about the quality of the conversations that I'm having. But actually, as a measurement, I think that's good enough. I've said all along, and I've said it in various organizations that I've worked in and for, and usually with the CEO, because quite often they're usually salespeople or accountants, aren't they? That's the sort of traditional route in some way, shape, or form to a CEO. And quite often therefore they want like data, like hard data. You talked about Gallup. People want hard data where we've done some kind of survey and some kind of measurement. And I can remember one particular instance with a CEO of him going, well, where's the data? And I said, you're looking at it. And he like looked at me and I was like, it's me, because I'm a human being. We interact with other human beings and we gather data, and we're sophisticated at that, in that we pick up words, we pick up what's not said, we understand body language, we read the tone and the feel of what somebody says. For me as an empath, I can walk in with a group of people and think, oh, okay, I sort of understand the vibe that's coming off here and there. And I'm not saying that necessarily everybody is as tuned in as that. I'm not saying I'm special, but not everybody is an empath and not everybody's that tuned in. But most of us are if we really listen. And so therefore I think that the evidence is us. So I think the quality of those conversations and the words being used by people is my measurement, really, that says this is making an impact because I'm having deep conversations with men who are going, I've not said some of this to anybody.
Amazing. Yeah, absolutely. When you have that conversation with someone and they said, I've never shared this before, you're on to a winner. And measuring the intangible that doesn't have a direct outcome in terms of a financial result or some kind of very clear win or whatever it might be, understanding those meaningful conversations, those meaningful experiences, those meaningful bonds, that the connection that you're forming with others, that's when you know that you are having the effect that you're desiring.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, and I see it, I see it in the teams that I go in and work with, in that I see the level of their conversation improving. I have conversations with individuals that then get replayed in their own words in a more public team setting, that you think, yeah, you didn't have maybe the language before that, you maybe hadn't processed it before that, you hadn't maybe got the confidence, but you know that I'm sort of here and I'm backing you. It's that is the evidence. That's the sort of more tangible outcome of it. And I'm not, I'm not a trained coach, so I don't promote myself as a coach, but it's that sort of coaching, mentoring, critical professional friend role that I take that then starts playing out in teams. And that's not to say, the teams that I work with, some of what I do when I do like high performing teams workshops, when I do some of these facilitated sessions and what I would call like a facilitated conversation, then things really start to come out. But a lot of that starts on a one-to-one basis, building that trust, letting them know that you sort of are hearing them and you understand. And it's elevating then the level of conversation that goes on in a team that then suddenly starts to accelerate them because people say what they think, they say how they feel, the space becomes safer, and then it becomes more productive. And you're right, it's sometimes selling that to an organization where you get a lot of this, well, we're bringing in a consultant and we want to do X and we want Y to be the outcome, and boom, there you go, off we go. And I do that, I help businesses build strategy, I come in and fix people problems and do all of those things. So I can point to stuff where I can go, well, that's something that I did. But with these conversations, it's more subtle than that, but it's then how the needle starts to move because you've got better dialogue, more confidence, more authenticity, more honesty coming to the table. And I had a conversation with somebody recently where I said, like, your team aren't telling you the truth, and I got yelled at in terms of like who's lying to me was the yelling that came back. And I said, they're not lying to you, they're just not being honest with you. And that's a different thing. That's a more subtle thing where they're holding stuff back. So they're not giving you misinformation, they're just not giving you information. And it's that where I really start to see the impact. It's like, right, let's actually say how we feel or what the real issue is here. It's not just all about sharing our feelings, I don't mean it, but on a particular issue, what do I really think about this? What's my genuine take on it? What are my worries and my concerns? And you start to elevate, like I said, that the level of conversation, the level of dialogue, and then the needle moves in terms of performance, collective performance, individual performance. And that's when you can start to go, right, now it's making a difference because we are operating in a different way with each other. We're operating with greater honesty. Our ability to give each other feedback has shifted quite dramatically. We understand each other more deeply. We know what's going on for each other on a level that we didn't do before, because we do, particularly again, the guys, a lot of that, oh yes, I'm fine. Yeah, and we're not sharing, really what's happening in our lives, in our minds, in our teams, because there's a lot of bravado that sits at the front of it. So masks start to come off and authenticity takes over, and then performance comes from that.
I hear you. And a lot of what I do is overlapping here in terms of the purpose element, in terms of the understanding of moving away from individualism and competition to collaborative approaches. It's huge. I'm also hearing this softening. It's not soft and fluffy, but there is a softening in slowing of the pace and just appreciating those around you instead of charging at full speed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's that, there's a book, isn't there? It's like Thinking Fast and Slow, isn't it? It's that sense of slowing down to speed up. And that's the difference. Spending some time with each other, having the deeper conversation, having more effective conversations, more effective meetings. I'm like, oh my God, if I could fix meetings, that'd be a whole other stream and a whole other purpose for me. But I try and do some of that with organizations where it's like, right, let's have a better quality meeting so that we actually want to turn up to it in the first instance. We see that there's a point to it, and we go away thinking, oh yeah, that was really good, I got something from that, rather than thinking, I've now got 2 hours worth of work backed up and I'm more stressed than I was when I went in. It's that. And actually, like you say, a softener, I love that use of word, that we soften in relation to each other to actually make ourselves stronger, because that's what starts to happen, rather than, like I said, this bravado, this bullet gate kind of approach where we have to go a million miles an hour. It's just about results. And it's like, well, the results will come when you have better quality conversations, where you've broken down some barriers, where you've got deeper understanding of each other, where you are absolutely then operating as a team and as a unit, rather than, as you say, like in competition with each other. Then suddenly the results will start to come. But it's getting people to take that pause, take that breath before they go again.
And taking that pause and taking that breath for you, how are you embodying that in your own approach to the frustrations and I guess the huge climb that this work is going to be taking you on, this journey?
Mm. I think I do it in various ways for me. I think that I've realized the value of my own reflection time, and that I'm really guilty of like doing all the time. It's a learnt behavior from my childhood of doing, always doing. But actually having some reflection time, whether that's for me, having some music on and just letting my brain wander a little bit. I'm a big exponent of the gym and exercise. I use that a lot of different forms. I box, I weightlift, I do yoga, I run. So it's a mixture of all of those things that gives my brain that opportunity to process. Trying to give my brain a rest. I've got a very busy brain. So one of the things that I do, I sing, and that's like completely different, because all you can do is focus on what you're doing. And so that gives my brain a rest from all of it. And I often find that then the quality of my thinking post that improves. So it's in various different ways. And a lot for me, obviously I've got books that I've published, but quite often if something in particular is bothering me, then it probably usually turns into a LinkedIn post, because I write as a way of processing my thinking. That's probably my preferred medium.
And it's interesting, isn't it? I'm also of that generation of growing up that doing equals achieving, achieving equals being praised equals the version of love that was available in the workplace. That has been translated of if you're working hard and giving all of yourself, then you're doing a good job. It's different now. We do have that blend. There is a huge amount of you're taking your work home physically, and mentally was mostly the time before. But this softening, this understanding of how to really have better, more meaningful conversations, how to bring more purpose into your space and work with contribution and collaboration, that has to have a ripple effect into your family, friends, the life that you have the other side of the workplace door.
100%. And I have a leadership development program and a framework called Simple. And Simple was built and inspired by 25 years worth of HR experience, or probably maybe 20 years at that point when I started. But actually, it really crystallized when I read a book called Lost Connections. And in Lost Connections, it talked about the 9 disconnections that we have that are impacting really society's mental health. Really, that's the general premise. But I can remember reading it at quite as a lot of these things, they come along at a sort of seminal moment for you, don't they? And I was signposted towards it, and I read that book and I sat there and I thought, this applies to the workplace. If we could change these disconnections in the workplace to connections, and certainly out of the 9 disconnections that are in the book, like 6 of them, I thought like this applies to the workplace. And you're right, for me, it was like, well, if we can create that connectivity, that better connectivity, that more thoughtful connectivity at work, we will improve the experience of work, which is, like I said, I'm motivated by, for our employees. We will improve their mental health as a result, which was the point of the book. And actually, that will make society better, because we will be sending home individuals who aren't going to go home and kick the dog or shout at the children, or worse, that we're sending home people who, feel more fulfilled, less stressed, have had a more enriching experience. And if we're sending them home like that, then home's going to be better. And, it's not going to solve every societal problem. It's not going to solve every issue at home. But if we're sending people away from work in a better state because we've treated them better and with more humanity, and then home is better, then what turns up back at work will be better, because they've had a better night's sleep and they probably haven't maybe drunk as much or become as stressed or as impatient with the people that they love. Or if they live by themselves, maybe they've got more energy to then have a connection outside of work, so they're less lonely. So all of those things mean that what then turns up at work is of better quality, more grounded. Happy is transient, so it's a word I steer away from, but just more positive. And that becomes circular. And I just think that wider thing of, it's like the flywheel, isn't it? And it starts to turn very, very slowly, but gradually it gets a momentum all of its own, because work becomes better because what's turning up at work is more positive. Home becomes better because what's going home becomes more positive. And that actually we just end up with less of this stress, this weariness, this sense of burden that I think there's a lot of around at the moment. And I think, coming back to the sort of link with men, I see that in particular because they're sort of carrying a lot of that. And that was how Simple was born. Simple is an acronym, but actually those 6 things in Simple as an acronym are reflections of the 6 things in Lost Connections that I felt was really important to focus on as leaders. And if we did those, and funnily enough, they're quite simple, hence the name, away we go in terms of making better leaders, but without changing too much. For me, it's about tweaking stuff rather than some great revolution.
And this is what's so interesting, that your personal quest in terms of understanding what's driving you, what your purpose is, what's meaningful, has come from understanding what that is for you first. Just as in Johann Hari's book, Lost Connections, he's trying to understand a solution for his own depression, and then he then goes on this quest to understand what it is that has happened, and he senses all these different disconnections. And it's a fabulous book. I remember reading it, and he just reminded me it's probably time for a reread, because it's very much a case of the work I'm doing now is much more aligned with what you were just sharing, absolutely, than when I was first reading it. This is the thing: purpose isn't found externally. It's something that you create and feel from within. And that is, for me, one of the biggest myths that I have to help people to dispel, that they're not going to be able to search for it externally. It is something that you really do feel from within. Share what purpose has meant for you.
I think that it's a sense of, for me, I think I refer to it as a fire. For me, it's a fire inside that I think for so long, in all sorts of different settings, and more because of external stuff, I think I tried to kind of quash that fire a lot. I think that was a lot of what I felt externally was, pressure to do that, or the need to conform, or don't speak out and speak up. And it was a fire I couldn't deny. I think that's what it's come from. Hence why, I always say, well, what's your purpose and your passion? Oh, it's men, ha ha ha, but it's really true. And I think, but it's almost like, oh, we dare not speak it out loud sort of thing. But for me, it's always been a fire, and it's something that it almost feels physical. It's like I feel that fire in my belly when I talk about it. And it's the fact that I can't, no matter what I do or distract myself with, or how I try and put myself in a box, or conform or suppress, I can't, and it finds its way out. And I think I've been on a long journey of it finding its way out. And I think that some of that comes from, I've had a lot of men that have tried to break me. I've found that a lot in my life, both personally and professionally. And some have come really close, but I'm not broken. And probably a bit like, I mean, I say, don't they, with a broken bone, that actually it becomes stronger as a result of the break. And I think that that's probably a little bit where I've ended up. And it's, yeah, it's an undeniable sort of fire that literally kind of burns. I feel it. It sort of emotionally burns with me.
I love that description. And it is so easy to use a metaphor to help articulate something that sometimes doesn't have words necessarily attached to them. You mentioned earlier that you've got the evidence, the experience, the confidence, and the courage to step into this space. And with this focus on being present, you use your singing to help you to stay very much in the moment, as opposed to in the future or the past. It's what is keeping you, holding you in this space, is your interest, your passion, your understanding. Yeah, we need to give our brains a rest from time to time, but it is understanding what serves you and what it is that you're interested in, and not hiding away from that anymore. This understanding that this is your focus and it's a ever evolving journey, you're still navigating it. Does that feel, or how does that feel, to know that you don't have all the answers?
Sometimes that's scary, because I am still trying to sort of pin down that thing of, okay, so this is what I do for you. And sometimes that's scary. Sometimes it's really frustrating. In those moments though, where I have, whether it's a conversation, and just recently it happened to me, literally I was sitting in a working cafe and got into a conversation with a guy that had sat down opposite me, and this conversation just unraveled in terms of, I said, this is sort of what I was doing and whatever, and he's like, well, that wasn't what I was expecting you to say. And we got into this fantastic conversation about, the society, and how it is for men at the moment. I think every time I have one of those conversations, or it's a comment that comes into my inbox in some way, shape, or form, people that I've worked with a long time ago, men that I've worked with a long time ago, who show up, those is when, that fire just burns so fiercely. That's the feeling where it's like, yes, I've found there is a seam of something here. There is a rich seam of something, and I feel like I'm mining it all the time, but I'm becoming more and more confident that there is a seam. And even with women, I went to an event not so long ago, got talking to a couple of women, and who were like, "Oh God, yeah," like, because my husband's amazing, and like, but he finds it really difficult. We worry about our son and what's being said about men, to our, and as our child sort of starts to experience society. And one woman in particular said, the person I find this hardest with is my own mother, because I tell my mum how great my partner is and how helpful and supportive and brilliant. And my mother says, "Oh God, don't tell him that. Don't let him know." And I think, isn't that true though? It's like, oh, we don't want to tell them they're great in case that comes back and bites them, or they get too big headed or whatever. And you think, actually, that's quite sad, isn't it? But all of those tiny micro moments for me is what just adds to that fire, and that feeling of, this these things need to be said. We need to be saying these things out loud.
And this seam of something, again, a fabulous expression. And I have a very strong belief that things are never said without them meaning something. at some level. What is it that you are joining, if this is a theme of two elements that are being joined together?
I think the seam is for me, it's about change. It's about a sea change of, I always say that, we need something different. We need a different paradigm without a doubt. And I think there's a lot of men who are going, yeah, we're hearing it. It's not the patriarchy anymore. Like that isn't going to serve us going. It's served us up until now, and there are elements of it that will continue to serve us. So it's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but we get that it's no longer can be the patriarchy. Similarly, those that want to smash the patriarchy, which I absolutely loathe, are often those that then think, oh, it's the matriarchy. And I can tell you for nothing, it's not that either, right? Because, like, women don't have all the answers. But I always say that it's not the patriarchy and it's not the matriarchy. But if we don't define something new, then it will become anarchy. And that isn't the one that we want. We need to define something new and different. And that for me is the bit that's coming together. It should be all the best bits of the patriarchy and all the best bits of the matriarchy. And then let's turn that into something that is fit for now and fit for the future, and probably not forever, because the world will turn and things will change, but we need something different because what we've got right now is not working. And that's the thing that I feel is channeling this seam that says there is something different out there. We just need to articulate, work out, and build what it is instead.
And I've just realised that you said that you were mining it all the time. So this seam of something is almost like the seam of a, you have seam of a particular coal or something. It's something that's substantially viable or valuable rather. And this seam that you have, which is this seed change, this real difference. Yeah, it's more than what Miss World would have said in the 70s. This is something of value and something that is meaningful because you can articulate exactly what it is. Carolyn, I feel we could have this conversation and it could just carry on and evolve into all sorts of different strands. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing what it is that you are doing and your focus on why. It really is incredible work. How would someone be able to reach out? They've listened to this episode and they say, I need to carry on this conversation with you.
LinkedIn is always the best ways to find me. So I'm on there as Carolyn Hobdey. Yeah. LinkedIn is always my preferred medium. I love to speak on there and interact with people. So find me there.
Well, all the links are in the show notes, particularly the LinkedIn one. Carolyn, thank you for stepping into this space and championing men. And I wish you all the best with all of that you have, all that will come as a result. Some you will see, some you will live to see, some you will be leaving as a legacy. I absolutely know that for sure. So, yes, isn't it amazing what this fire inside is enabling you to do now? How would you like to close out today's episode, please?
I would say to anybody that's listening is about focusing on that legacy. What is it that you want people to say about you when you're no longer there, in whatever way that means? And I think if we think hard about that, and if we think what are the ways that I need to behave to get that legacy that I would like, I think if we all did a little bit more of that, everything would be a bit better.
That's a wrap for today, but the journey doesn't end here. Share your takeaways, leave a review, or post your insights. Your voice helps others discover the value of these stories. Want to dive deeper into purpose? Check the show notes for ways to work with me. Get a copy of my book or to sign up for Friday Focus, my weekly newsletter packed with clarity and inspiration. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.